The master plan. Outside, the snow lay drifted in deep piles. The sky was clear, a dark blue with a pale slice of moon hovering just above the horizon. From outside the closed windows of the cafeteria, you could hear the muffled clatter of wooden bowls. Looking in, you could see the glow of candles forming soft yellow circles in the shadowed rooms and hallways. The meeting room was empty. Over the winter it had been transformed. Diagrams of the dam covered the walls. A, a time frame listed the steps involved in building the dam and the date by which each step should be finished. There were drawings of all the sections of the dam site and the operations center, a cinder block building on the east side of the river. The computer was housed there. Below, in the basement, the pictures showed a set of emergency generators to be used in the event of a power failure. An electric cable ran through a narrow tunnel in the mountainside and supplied the energy to operate the computer and the dam. Timothy had studied the drawings so many times that he knew them by heart. Even so, he paused in front of them before he sat down. Raxo, Sally, and Brendan followed suit. The other members of the training unit came in one by one. There was no joking, no teasing, no easy banter. When Arthur and Justin appeared in the doorway, the room was completely quiet. Justin spoke slowly. Today, I'll present what you've been waiting for, the master plan for the sabotage of the computer and the dam. The plan will not be easy to accomplish. It will take skill and intelligence and stamina, but we think it can be done. Justin paused. The room was so tense that the air felt electric. He outlined the plan. We will leave here in 2 weeks and establish a headquarters and living quarters adjacent to the dam site. We'll set up a security force and do all our work under their supervision at night. During the first 2 weeks, we'll become familiar with the layout of the site and with the computer. We'll study the computer manual and make copies of the programs that are in use. The next month will be spent practicing with the computer. Each night, we'll enter parts of our program, check them, then erase them before we have to leave. We'll open the computer and study the circuitry inside it. We'll study the gates and spillways of the dam itself and the mechanisms that open and close them. Security will be crucial. The humans will be checking their equipment carefully. They must never notice that it has been tampered with. If they did, they might increase the number of watchmen guarding the site at nights. That could make our work impossible. Our program will be entered into the computer once and for all on the night before the grand opening ceremony. There are risks to this, many risks. We will have only one night to accomplish all that must be done, but the grand opening will have an audience of thousands. If it is a disaster, and we plan to make it a disaster, the people will be angry. They will think the Joneses are incompetent, and they will not want more money spent on the dam. But if the computer has a different program in it, they'll figure out that someone else was involved, Brendan observed. Justin held up one paw. Let me finish. Our plan is that the computer and the program inside it will be destroyed. But as an extra precaution, Arthur has worked things out so that our program closely resembles the real program. Under close inspection, it will appear that someone accidentally typed the wrong information into the computer. Arthur stepped forward. He had printed 2 columns of figures on the blackboard behind him. These numbers represent the formula the humans use to figure out the speed at which the dam's gates will open and close. They used information like the pressure exerted by tons of water on the face of the dam and the thickness and weight of the gate themselves to arrive at what they think is a safe speed. Arthur smiled.
We've used their formula to calculate the opposite, the unsafe speed.
He pointed to the second row of figures.
These are the numbers we'll be typing into the program. They will cause the gates to rise so fast that their intense vibrations will shatter the concrete wall of the dam.
Sally looked confused. You mean we'll be typing numbers into their program? Arthur shook his head.
It would be easier if we could, but their program is designed with certain limits that ensure the safety of the dam. As it is now, their program would shut off if we inserted the numbers that we want to. Our program will have no safety limits.
Raxo raised his paw.
How are we going to wreck the computer?
I was getting to that.
Arthur smiled again.
We'll be placing a fuse between two electrical connections inside the machine. We'll soak the fuse in oil first to make it more flammable. The next time the program is activated, the fuse will ignite. The fire will creep along a piece of twine to a small heap of blasting powder. For that, we'll figure about an hour from the time the program begins. The explosion will be strong enough to destroy the inside of the computer without hurting anyone standing nearby.
It sounds good. Beatrice seemed to be thinking out loud. But you've left out one part that we all want to hear. Arthur and Justin both looked startled.
What do you mean?
You haven't said who is going. There was a slight stir in the room. It was hard not to look around and think about who had performed better or worse during the training sessions, who might be needed more at home, who was strong enough and brave enough and smart enough to be chosen to go on the mission. Justin looked as if he wanted to say more, but all he said was, "The names will be posted on the door of this room next Monday." Just before the session ended, Hermione came in. She was smiling. "I've got good news. Christopher regained consciousness for a moment this afternoon. He's still very sick, but it's a good sign." Hooray! The atmosphere in the room seemed suddenly changed, from dreadful seriousness to a warm, nice feeling. Timothy felt a smile spread from ear to ear, and when he looked towards Raxo, the smile was mirrored on his friend's face. Even Justin was smiling, as if for that moment the plan didn't even matter. "He spoke," Hermione said. "Elvira wasn't sure what he meant, but she heard the word clearly. He said, 'more.'" Raxo was nervous about telling Elvira about the candy, but it turned out there was no need for him to tell her because Isabella already had. She told the whole story in Elvira's office next to the infirmary. Christopher's parents were there, and near the end, Raxo, Timothy, and Justin came in too. "I've been tired all day, but the sacrifice was worth it," she proclaimed. "I was up till 4 o'clock this morning, you know. Making candy is a lot of work." Elvira sounded puzzled. "But I never saw you come in. And I was with Christopher all night, except for when the sentries came in, and that was earlier." Isabella looked embarrassed. "Actually, it was my helper who gave the candy to Christopher." "Your helper?" She nodded. Raxo was standing in the doorway, and Isabella pointed toward him. "Raxo." "Raxo?" Elvira looked more and more astounded. "But Raxo never came in either." Raxo was unsure about what to say, but Isabella didn't give him much time to say anything. "He sneaked in and put some candy in Christopher's mouth, and it just dissolved there. And when Christopher tasted it, he knew he had to wake up to get another piece." Elvira looked at Raxo. Is this true? He nodded.
You were asleep in your chair.
Were you afraid to ask?
He was just so sick. I thought you might think it would make him worse.
Elvira smiled. Raxo had never seen her smile like that. She looked gentle and kind, like someone's fairy godmother. She asked, "Where's the rest of the candy?"
It's hidden in the storeroom, in the basket where we keep the mint.
Go get it, Elvira said. We may never know exactly what helped Christopher, but he does seem better. And if it was the candy, then we should give him some more. Raxo ran down the hall to the storeroom and took 3 pieces of candy out of the basket. It was only on the way back that he started to think harder about what was happening. Isabella had lied. She had claimed credit for the candy, as if it had been her idea in the first place, as if she had picked the mint and hidden it all winter in the storeroom, as if she had been the one who had realized that the candy might save Christopher's life. Should he tell them the truth? Raxo hesitated. Suddenly he understood why Isabella had lied. She had felt hurt by being asked to leave the training unit, and this was a way to make up for that, especially in front of Justin. Isabella wanted to be important and special in the same way he, Raxo, had, when, for example, he had lied to the other students about his background. In a way, Isabella was like him. He remembered how her paw had felt when he had grabbed her and pulled her into the thicket above the stream, how she had looked when she was lying there so scared that she couldn't even move. He decided, at least for the time being, to let her have it her way. But when he got back to the office, only Elvira was there. "Everyone's gone outside," she explained, taking the candy. "Jeremy just arrived. He flew through the storm last night. Finally, he couldn't see anymore, so he was forced to hole up in a hollow tree. His feathers are half frozen, so they're building a bonfire to warm him up. And Isabella ran up to the kitchen and made him some soup. But he brought the medicine."
That's wonderful.
Elvira nodded. "He deserves a warm welcome and all thanks."
Yes, he does.
Dreamily, Raxo watched Elvira take a spoonful of the white powder and mix it with water. He couldn't help thinking about the day he and Timothy had arrived at Thorn Valley. He had resented the welcome Timothy got then, and just now he had been arguing with himself about whether to tell the others that he deserved the credit for the candy. In the meantime, Jeremy had been flying through a snowstorm to bring Christopher his medicine, and Jeremy hardly knew Christopher. Maybe Jeremy was really a hero. On the other hand, Nicodemus had said that anyone who tried hard was a hero.
The rat who carries more grain than she really has to, or the student who does not lose his temper when another rat takes what is rightfully his.
Raxo cringed, remembering the pen. But surely he had redeemed himself. The candy had been hard work, and it had been his idea. "Raxo?" He started.
I was thinking.
"Christopher drank it all, and he ate 2 pieces of candy."
Can I see him?
Elvira shook her head briskly. "Not yet. He's still very weak, but if he's better tomorrow."
Hooray!
Raxo felt like dancing around the infirmary. He leaped into the air and cracked his tail backward and forward. "Hooray!" "Watch that tail," Elvira said. "You might knock something over." "Hooray!" Raxo couldn't help himself. Elvira threw her front paws up in the air. "How can I run an infirmary with rats dancing and shouting and waving their tails all over the place?"
I'm leaving in a minute,
Raxo said, grinning.
Everyone deserves a chance to celebrate now and then, you know.
"Oh," said Elvira. She looked confused for a moment, but then she smiled. You're good at it, aren't you?
At what?
Celebrating. Now it was Raxo's turn to look confused.
Why, I suppose I am.
Maybe one day you'll give me a lesson. Elvira paused, looking thoughtful. She smiled again. I'd like that, she said. The mission. Justin, Arthur, Sally, Brendan, Brutus, Timothy, Fern, Beatrice, Mitchell, Vincent, Inez, Nolan, Raxo. Raxo stood in front of the list for a full moment, staring. He closed his eyes and then opened them again. It was still there. Raxo. They trusted him. He felt like shouting out loud, but he didn't. After all, there were rats who looked at the list and then walked away quickly, with their heads down. Still, he couldn't help puffing out his chest and snapping his tail just slightly as he left the meeting room to look for Timothy. It was a gray, rainy morning when they left. The last lumps of frozen snow were melting in the steady drizzle, and the ground was soaked. Nicodemus clasped the paw of each member of the mission.
Good luck, he whispered. Do the best you can, but be careful. We want you back alive.
He smiled.
We'll think about you every day.
When they arrived, the moon was full, and the rats saw that work on the dam had progressed further than they had guessed. The builders had constructed a spillway through the cliff, and most of the water in the river was being diverted through this channel, leaving the riverbed dry enough for work on the base of the dam. Iron pilings had been driven deep into the stony riverbed in 2 columns, and sheets of thick metal had been placed between these. A narrow walkway had replaced the pontoon bridge. It stretched across the river to the operations center, which sat against the far wall of the cliff like a small concrete house. The first night, Arthur led the others across the walkway, stopping midway to explain the construction. The rats drew pictures and measured the structure of the dam in every dimension. By the time they had finished, the sky was beginning to turn gray in the east. They retired to their makeshift office, which was nothing more than a huge bramble in a recess of the cliff about a half a mile from the dam site. Their life was primitive. The bramble was the only space they had found that was big enough to hold all of them at once, so they used it as the headquarters for the mission. They slept in cracks and bushes in the immediate area, either alone or in pairs. For food, they gathered anything that grew, sometimes supplementing the roots and acorns with dried seed cakes they had brought from home. For the first week, they did all their explorations together, learning gradually the shape and texture of each facet of the dam site, what it looked like in the darkness and moonlight, how it felt to the feet, how it smelled, how far it was from a hole or crack large enough to hide a fleeing rat. There were several lights around the site, one in the lot where the workers and night watchmen parked their cars, and 2 more on each side of the operations center. These were turned on at 5 o'clock in the evening and remained on until dawn. The 2 night watchmen patrolled the site along a regular circuit, varying their route only to stop and smoke a cigarette or drink a soda. During the day, the rats observed a tall man in a business suit and yellow helmet going in and out the door of the operations center.
The chief engineer,
Arthur explained. That night, he chose Brutus, Sally, and Brendan to help him look the computer over, while the other rats stood guard outside the door, ready to warn them if the night watchman should break their routine. The control room was brightly lit, and the computer filled an entire wall. It was a long, narrow machine with a keyboard bordered by dials and gauges. There were 3 large screens on the wall above the keyboard. "It's so big," Sally whispered. Her heart began to race, and her legs trembled. The computer hummed as if it were breathing, and the flickering gauges reminded her of the yellow-green eyes of hawks. Arthur's voice was reassuring.
"The 3 of you can take cover under this desk while I get my bearings," he said. "Your goal tonight is to memorize the location of everything in the room so that we can tell the others exactly what to expect. I'm going to look for the computer manual."
Sally wanted to say, "I can't move," but her throat was too dry, and to her surprise, her paws did move when she ordered them to. Left, right, until she was standing beside Brendan and Brutus under the gray metal desk. They looked around the room. It was messy. Books and papers covered the tables and chairs, and a metal wastebasket was stuffed with trash. A small storeroom to the left of the main room held paint cans, bits of wire screening, cartons of paper, and a stack of plywood. There were metal bookshelves along another wall. Near these was a desk with a typewriter on it, and a metal machine with a hinged cover and letters on one side spelling the word Xerox. As the others watched, Arthur scanned the bookcase until he found the computer operator's manual. He dragged the book onto an open shelf, and for a while he read. Then he began to take notes, but it seemed as if only minutes had passed before there was a tap on the window, the warning that the night watchman was approaching. Arthur leapt down from the shelf, and all 4 rats scurried into the storeroom. They found a hiding place under an overturned cardboard box. They held their breath as the heavy boots of the guards walked the length of the control room, coming closer, closer. Then, after a pause, the footsteps resumed walking away. Moments later, there were 2 taps on the window. All clear. This time, Sally climbed up on the shelf with Arthur to help him take notes. He pointed out the word Jones scrawled in large letters on the page entitled Security.
It's the password into the system,"
he told Sally.
"It means we'll be able to go into the computer and get out any information they've already programmed in."
"Great!" Sally was beginning to feel almost at ease. Arthur nodded.
"But we have a lot of work ahead of us,"
he said.
"This note-taking could wind up being a very slow process."
They continued their work for 2 nights, entering the operations center after dark, scouting the control room and the adjacent storeroom, taking notes from the operator's manual. Each time, a different group went in with Arthur, and he tried to be patient as they exclaimed or trembled or stared wide-eyed when they saw the computer. But he was worried. He needed the information from the manual so that he could work with it. He needed it now. It was Raxo who realized that there was a faster way. The word Xerox had stuck in his mind for several days, surfacing during odd moments, and while he lay in a dusty crack beside Timothy trying to sleep. Then one evening, just as he was about to bite into his ration of seed cake, he realized what it meant. The hearty male voice from the television commercial popped into his brain. He recited out loud,
"The Xerox 223 copier. Clean, efficient, economical. Don't let your office be without one." "What?" Beatrice said. "What are you talking about?" "That's it," Raxo shouted. "A Xerox machine."
The other rats turned and stared.
"What's a Xerox machine?" "It makes copies on pieces of paper," Raxo explained. "We could use it to copy the computer manual. We could probably copy the entire thing in 2 or 3 nights."
"Of course,"
Arthur said.
"A copying machine. I've read about them, but I didn't realize what it was."
"Will we be able to operate it?" Vincent asked.
I'm certain we can figure it out,
Arthur said.
Raxo and I will go in tonight and try.
And, in fact, using the machine was simple. That night, Arthur and Raxo copied almost half of the computer manual, handing bunches of the finished copies through the door when they became too bulky, and stopping only when they heard the warning tap on the window. The next night, Raxo and Beatrice worked the Xerox machine, leaving Arthur free to analyze the data that had been collected the night before. Vincent and Brutus stood guard outside. The work was slower. For one thing, they ran out of paper, and the carton where they had found more the previous night was now empty. They searched for a full 20 minutes before they found another carton behind the stacks of plywood in the storage room. Then they couldn't decide whether to leave the partially used carton in the space where the empty one had been. They finally arranged the pile so that it looked just as they had found it. So they hurried a little as they copied the final pages of the computer manual and handed the copied sheets out to Brutus to deliver to the runner who was to carry the stack to headquarters. They struggled to return the heavy manual to its place on the shelf. Raxo waited under the desk as Beatrice scurried up on top of the Xerox machine and turned it off for the final time. Her back was to the door when the men came in. How could it have happened? That was the first thought that flashed through Raxo's mind as he saw them, and to his horror they seemed to move in slow motion. Their voices stretched out sleepily into the night.
A rat! Catch it! Kill it!
One man drew his gun. Beatrice froze in terror.
Don't fire your gun in here,
the other guard said.
You might damage the computer.
As he spoke, he grabbed the trash can and brought it down over Beatrice's head.
Here, I've got it. Be careful, they can bite, you know. I'll put the screen over the top.
Beatrice had come alive now, plunging again and again at the wire cover on the trash can, but Raxo could see that it was no use. The guard's gun remained drawn. As soon as they were outside, she would be killed. He could not stand the thought, and just as the two men were about to carry their burden out the door, he burst from his hiding place and leaped to the top of the desk. A pencil and paper were lying there. He grabbed the pencil and wrote in the largest letters he could manage, "Stop." He held the paper up in front of him with both paws.
Oh no.